We all fight with this issue these days. Huh?
Pretty soon I'll be able to give him a run for his money. But back to our topic at hand. So, but he said that you couldn't ask him questions. So I don't like rules. So you can ask me questions if you want. But the main goal, obviously, is to pick your brain and sort of see what's going on, especially because we are sort of joking around. But before we get into some of the questions, I think it would be very interesting for everybody watching, because you've had a front row seat to sort of how things have, what the last couple of weeks have been like in the restaurant industry for you, for our mutual friends and colleagues. Obviously, we hope that everybody is safe. I hope that you're safe with your family. But take us behind the scenes and tell us sort of how things unfolded a few weeks ago, because I don't think most people grasp how sudden and how severe everything changed for basically millions of people.
Well, I mean, the news, this I think was in the week of March 10th, 13th, in that sense. I mean, the news kept changing hourly. You know, I mean, we saw Italy was shut down. That was a couple of weeks prior, and that seemed to be already bad news, or highly unusual. And then we saw how it came into New York, and we saw also the cover counts dropping significantly. Private parties, just one party canceled after the other. So you could see, you know, the business impact immediately. I mean, we've never seen anything like this, not even the recession in 2008. And so we saw, I mean, people are taking this very, very seriously, and the market responds also very, very strongly to that. And I mean, I've seen Eric a couple times struggling. I've never seen him struggling this time. And thankfully, I think it was the Friday, I think it was March 13th, he took the hard and difficult decision to close the restaurant, because look, we work with people, we get in contact with people, and it became just irresponsible. Because look, we work with the purveyors, we work with the cooks, we work with the guests, and I mean, morally not justifiable. So yeah, and then 4 days after, it came in by law, because people still were open, you know, to do delivery or do all kind of, you know, other possibilities to save the business, because it was a huge impact. And so we've done that, yeah. And then shortly after, we were unemployed.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally from one day to the next.
I mean, this took a couple of days in our situation, but then we were unemployed. And again, Le Bernardin is actually a very busy restaurant, a very successful restaurant, thanks God. Aldo, Sohm were the same thing, but it came quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of restaurants that cook really good food and a lot of brilliant chefs. But when you've been around since, I can't remember exactly if it's 1985 or 1986 for Le Bernardin in New York, a restaurant becomes a part of the city. To me, Le Bernardin is like Radio City Music Hall or any other sort of institution. It's more than a restaurant. It's almost a landmark. And restaurants that have been around multiple generations do become landmarks. And so for everybody watching, I just want people to understand what this means is you're out of work. That also means no health insurance immediately, correct?
Well, we had to the end of the month, but.
Okay. Then from a technical standpoint, people do have an option of going into COBRA, which in the United States is a plan that allows you to keep the health insurance that you have with your employer for, I think it's 18 months now, but you have to be able to pay for that. And since you have no income, most people aren't able to pay for it, even if they wanted to have it. So that's a pretty dramatic thing to go from overnight, from having a good job in a very prestigious places to unemployed and no health insurance.
And basically don't see this coming. So you have a hard time to, you know, I mean, if people know, listen, this comes in a month or this comes in half a year, you have time to kind of prepare-ish as good as possible. This came from nowhere. And things
So
went quick, and things kept changing hourly. Also, that was the main issue, you know. And again, look, Eric was again. I've never seen him struggling like that and going back and forth. And you know, what is a business decision? What is a morally correct decision? You know, and they typically not in line all the time.
yeah. And so what are people doing right now?
They're being unemployed. I try to. I mean, I work very, very hard, right? I believe it or not, I didn't do anything for the first week or two. I started cycling a lot, trained a lot. While most of my colleagues gained weight, I actually lost weight. I have a glass of wine with my partner, Catherine, every day and make the best out of it. And now I started working again because with Wine Simple, with my book. I have also the website aldosohm.com, where obviously, as I'm the brand ambassador for Aldo, I sell the glasses over the website. And that keeps kind of, you know, that pays a couple bills.
Yeah, sure.
Because again, it's a small business. And again, small businesses are hit even harder.
Yeah, I know. Trust me. I think a lot of people are in that boat. Certainly, you know, we're not, I mean, so far everything's okay, but we're certainly not immune to any of the major macro things that might happen still somewhere down the line. Before we talk about the book, just to wrap up the sort of the conversation about the restaurant. So now, what is it? We're April 9th here. What do you think? A lot of your peers and a lot of chefs have said publicly that they don't believe that they believe that many restaurants will not reopen. And so now taking this pandemic and also the minimum wage, so for people watching, the minimum wage for restaurants is going up, and that creates an additional pressure. So what's your outlook, or what should people know about what's happening right now in the restaurant industry on a macro level?
You know, it's like looking in a crystal ball, because I wish I would have an answer. And again, I don't. I'm not a politician. I'm not an economist. I'm just a regular sommelier. And
You're not a regular sommelier.
no, but I mean that. It's just I'm just a small figure in this huge world. Again, the longer that takes, the longer New York or America is shut down, the more that number will go up of restaurants which won't reopen. Because look, politically, restaurants are not covered by anything. I know there's a couple of restaurateurs fighting that. Everybody is trying to work for the community and takes care of the neighborhood and takes care of people. But yeah, that's kind of hard part. We really don't know, because we really don't know when we reopen. I mean, I'd be shocked if we open before June 1st.
Okay, so that's obviously 2 months from now. So people.
But that's my earliest date. But again, God knows, it's spreading over the southern states right now.
Sure. So for people watching this who want to help, what can they do?
Well, we had a GoFundMe. Then there's several restaurant organizations which helps for restaurant workers. I can post a couple of online after my Instagram story to point that out.
We'll do the same.
But it's tough, you know. It's for me, I compare this often. I know you cannot compare systems or political systems. No, I want to talk about politics because that's not my expertise. It's interesting for me, even though I'm a European, when you look at the European structure, how companies are covered and how employees are covered versus here, just a comparison. And also the same with health insurance, because if you obviously in a pandemic like that, the last thing you try to worry is about health insurance. So that's the interesting comparison you can draw there. Now, again, listen, every country has its ups and has its downs. That's just what the world is, like on us. We have pros and we have cons. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, I mean, your optimistic attitude, as we were talking before we went live, is pretty remarkable. I'm not sure if I could keep that much composure.
I mean, there's not much we can do. I mean, look, I'm Austrian. We have a troubled history from last century, and I'm reading a lot of history books these days. You want to keep a positive spirit and try not to get the negative news get onto you, and trying to maneuver through that with as good as possible smile you can get, because the more positive energy you send, the more you will get.
Well,
I believe in karma. I'm not a Buddhist, but I believe in karma.
Well, so do I. And I think that that's a fantastic message to impart just for life, not, beyond this particular moment that we're all sort of grappling with. Before we talk about the book, I think it'd be interesting to just learn a little bit about your history. I learned the other day, I didn't know this, that your first wine trip to a region was in Piemonte. So that must be why we get along so well. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this, because you've obviously achieved your very high level running the wine program at Le Bernardin. You have your own wine bar, Aldo Sohm wine bar, which is just across the square, the plaza there. So, but how did it all start?
In Austria, restaurant, the hospitality business is a career and it's an education. You have to go to school for that. And my parents put me into hospitality school and a tourism college. So I finished that. However, after school, I was too slow. So I went to a restaurant as a waiter just to pick up on speed. And after my third job, everything in Austria and Tyrol, where I'm from, originally it's seasonal work, a little bit like up in Colorado. And then I came to a restaurant where the owner actually was not crazy enophile, but he had a fair interest and he cared for it. And there were two Swiss couples. They were like me today. They were at breakfast, super excited. What should they have for lunch and for dinner, and what to drink with it? And they asked me about wine recommendations, and I didn't have. Had minimal, experience, but knowledge from school. But that's again insignificant. So I started buying books, and because the internet wasn't there. So, and back in the day, it was much more difficult to get into information than it is. And one of my first wine books was from Jens Prive. So I read that book and I inhaled that. And my first bottle of wine actually was the 83 D'Armaggi by Angelo Gaia, wow, which is kind of excessive, but that's how the wine bug hit me very, very hard. Okay. And I researched and I bought that bottle. And then, I worked in another restaurant, which was even more wine-centric, and they had a sommelier, and we decided to drive to Piedmont, and I think it was in September, and poorly prepared because we didn't know, we were too junior. And so by random, we stopped by at Gaia, and Angelo let us in, because a week prior, we went to a South African wine tasting, and his name was Rolf Butenschön, an importer for South African wines. And then we saw him, and then we waved, and Angelo came straight out, and then we were in.
Wonderful.
He even gave us a bottle, a Sordildin 82. Hence, wow. We asked him to say, "No, I'm not making this up." It was all meant to be. We went to dinner also then I think it was Il Conte up in Neve.
Yeah, La Contea.
La Contea. And then we talked about Serafino Levi.
Okay.
The next day also, we went there and he was there. We got a tasting and we got him bottles because people told us how to pay.
Wow.
And so, but we got only one label. We got 5 bottles, but only one label. I say, okay, fine. So, and then we ran out of money because credit cards didn't exist back then either. Then we had to go back home. And we went to stop by to Giacosa because from Levi it's not super far.
No.
So, and that was kind of where everything started.
Wow. And so that was your first trip, Gaia and Giacosa and Levi all in one, and you had a meal.
Not bad, no?
Not bad. And La Contea, which, doesn't exist anymore, but at the time it was the place, or one of the places, and certainly very formal relative to what the standard was in Piedmont. So
yeah, and then we went, I think, to Jena Neuf in Asti, if that still exists.
Yeah, those were like the places in the 80s.
Yeah, so that was good.
Wow. So then you go back to Austria, and now all of a sudden
I started learning more and more. Then eventually did my sommelier diploma, which in Austria takes 2 years, because you need to have 5 years of restaurant experience in order to qualify.
Okay.
And then the master sommelier didn't really exist in Central Europe because education is government controlled. And then I started competing. our trainer at the sommelier school was competing himself in 1998 at the best sommelier in the world competition. And I looked at that and I thought, this is intense. I will never do that. And yeah, sure enough, a year after, they asked me and they said, you would be ideal because you have the right mindset, the right attitude. We train you, don't worry about it. Wow. And then in 1999, I competed the first time in Austria and became second right away.
Okay.
So, and then, after fast forward, because I learned in competing, you have to compete. The big difference in sommelier competitions, it's similar like the master sommelier exam with some variances. However, there's two main differences. A, you're not allowed to compete in your native language. You have to compete in a foreign language. That's why I left Austria, because I saw all the top guys who were successful. They lived in foreign countries, and I thought with age 33, I changed my life.
Okay.
And came to the US because even my best friend asked me, London wasn't far enough for you, but from London, I didn't get the right instinct. I didn't feel it. And the other big difference is, while with a master sommelier, you train in a combination. You cannot do this with competing, because you would give your competitor an advantage over you if it comes down to it. So there's a big difference between passing and winning.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then on July 4, 2004, I came to the US.
Wow. To New York.
To New York right away. Yeah, I worked in a small restaurant in the West Village at Walsee. Then kept training with the Americans here, with the American Sommelier Association, which I asked them in 2007, can I compete here too? And they said, yeah, you're long enough here. And then I won the US in 2007. And then, then I got a phone call from Le Bernardin.
Which is remarkable. And that's obviously, well, la creme de la creme. Then an Austrian guy takes over French wine program.
Yeah, you know what? The funny thing is the press, actually, this was quite a roar through the press and also through the French sommelier community. I mean, one of the most French-focused restaurants, hires an Austrian sommelier. And I remember Grub Street actually wrote, is Le Bernardin changing now into an Austrian wine program? And I said, no, absolutely not. This is going to stay French. And even Jean-Luc Ledoux back in the day said, yeah, this makes sense. Actually, Eric's food works great with Cru de Veltliner.
He likes Bordeaux of all things.
I told the rest of the French sommelier friends, I said, listen, it's very simple. Why an Austrian sommelier? Because I feel like Marie Antoinette here. I just don't talk about brioche because you guys take this personal.
Well, I mean, I think one of leaving aside sort of technical knowledge and putting together lists and all that, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about Le Bernardin is that I think you seem to have a really good pulse on your clients, because you always find, you have a massive list, but you always find wines that are sort of within the price range of like the guest and that you think they're going to like, and that aren't necessarily, you've got all the obvious wines. If somebody has to have Ravenot or they have to have Koch or whatever, they can have that. Those are the billionaires. But for the average people, like us, you always find wines that are, it's an emerging producer, it's an older vintage that you got at auction somewhere, or it's off the beaten path, or you have one bottle left and nobody's ever going to find it on a list because it's, but I remember the 75 Gattinara that you opened for me once from Travaglini. It was magnificent, and it was on the price on the wine list was very reasonable for that wine.
It's not an obvious wine for Le Bernardin.
It's not, but it was great. And the other thing which I always loved was not loved is, as we're using the present tense here, is I was also really amazed that your by the glass wines were really inexpensive relative to what you would expect at a restaurant of this pedigree. So what drives that? Because I think that's one of the best. I mean, the food is going to cost what it costs at a place like that, and you just, that's just part of the entry fee, I guess. But obviously wine can be, well, you could go zero if you had nothing, or you can spend obviously an unlimited amount. But I think it's fantastic that you have so many wines that are inexpensive there. So how does that, tell us the philosophy of that?
I think you have to make wine accessible, no matter what. I think at Le Bernardin, we have a great situation because we have many regular clients who come sometimes up to 3 times a week. But then we have also first-time diners. We have very wealthy clientele, but we have also people who save up for a year to come to Le Bernardin. And to me personally, and I learned this also from the wine bar, while when you work in a 3-star restaurant, you get as a sommelier often very spoiled. And, it's just a $200 bottle of wine. And I hear this often, when you have young sommeliers, yeah, they just ordered the $200 bottle of wine. And I said to them, would you mind me asking, when was the last time you ordered just a $200 bottle of wine? And then it's interesting when you see how all of a sudden, they wake up from there into reality. And I said, never. And I said, exactly. That's a lot of money. So look, but I always think back, while often everything is very sale driven, the human per se falls often short. And I, as a sommelier, look, when I don't know you, I look at you and I try to talk and interact with you and feel you out. Where is this person? Where is it in terms of knowledge? What does he look for? I don't put a number just because I just don't put a number onto that person. Right? It's often, you see this often, sometimes people order $1,000 bottle of wine. The next time they come, they order a $70 bottle of wine and you see your head spinning. Well, what happened? You don't know what the circumstances are. They might have had closed a big business deal and then they just come back normal. I care about the human who is in front of me. And over the years, I've learned they started trusting me. And I told this to sommeliers, look, if somebody tells you they have a price range $100, you start recommending with 75. Give them 3 options and you stop by 95. Don't give them a $120 bottle of wine because, look, people are not stupid. They will never trust you. And we like to represent the human. Now, why is it to have a reasonable budget glass program? That's where you set the bar. Of course, you need to. I had this debate once with a journalist where I said at the wine bar, I said, look, you guys always push to bring $40 and below onto the wine lists, which are very, very important. But I said, look, you keep in mind, we are here in Midtown. I have tons of bankers just on top floors on top of us. If I come around with this beautiful Pinot Grigio, they're going to be very undervalued. And I do a terrible service job on them because I can't give them what they want. You need both. But I'd like to think myself a little bit back when you have this young couple coming in, this 25-year-old. We didn't start drinking wine with $400. There's just no way. Yes, when you drank Rouleau back in the day, that's what they costed. They weren't that expensive, or Roumier, or you name it. Now that changed, but now you still have to work as a sommelier, to work a little harder and start researching. And I still love the research. And nothing is more exciting if you can give people something new, right? And say, oh, wow, this is actually interesting. I mean, who would have drank 30 years ago a Gattinara in a French restaurant?
Who would have put it there in the first place?
But that's, again, look, there is no, you look for alternatives. You make it work. Eric helps me there a little bit. He gives a couple of dishes where it's red. I can work with red wine.
Yeah, well, a lot of his dishes work really well with red wine, especially the sauces.
Yeah, that's where he helps.
Yeah. So then, just sort of jumping more to present day, your book came out last year. What inspired you to write this book? It's a brilliant book that what I like about this book is that if you want to geek out on a region, there's enough there to do that. But then for the regions that I don't know really well, of which there are plenty, there's a lot of in-depth information there too, but it's also accessible. And tell us about the genesis of the book.
The idea came, this is basically target for people when I see them at the wine bar. I mean, look, you and I we talk about reduction and talk about, oak here and maybe a little too much malo there. For the average consumer, this is way over their head. When my partner, Catherine, right, I often think about here, this detail, and I said, who cares? Just give me a glass of wine, right? Of course, I do care. But people often, I see them at the wine bar, they're just often intimidated just to order a simple glass of Sauvignon Blanc. And that made me think. And let alone a German label or an Austrian label, and then it's syntax error anyway. So I wanted to take them the fear. I work on the other side, so on the spectrum. So I wanted to help these victims, to make them comfortable and tell them also, look, I don't know everything either. It's not a shame not to know something. It's a shame not to look for it and find it out. That's the only thing. So I wanted to simplify topics a little bit, not dumb it down, but simplify it, make it palatable, give maybe a slight opinion onto it, and make this fun, go on a journey. And give them also a little opinion onto it, because sometimes people, books are very, very straight without any opinion onto it, and that's often confusing people.
Yeah, but you've got some really nice touches here, like how I don't know if people can see, but this is not my highlight. This is your highlight. So that's like part of the formatting, which is sort of like making this, it sort of looks like a book you've had for 20 years, but in fact,
the information is, the idea was to get us in a coffee table category and make this palatable. And so it's little in sound bites. If you want to study, you can read this thing in one shot through. If you want to just look for 20 seconds, you can learn something even in 10 seconds, very quickly. And, I visited once, this many years ago, Alois Laguerre. And I took, the reason why I love my job so much, because I meet the greatest people in all sorts of industries, and they give you one quote and that sticks with you. And he said, look, they just rebuilt the cellar then. And he said, look, cellar workers it's very easy to observe that. When it's easy to clean, they love to clean. They hate cleaning when it's difficult. And this is basically what I took from studying. If studying is easy and fun, you love it. If it's hard, you just don't want to go onto it.
Well, you've achieved that with this book. It's really user-friendly. So congratulations.
Yeah, and it's for the person who wants to start reading about wine, take the intimidation away and the fear away, and give you, what am I doing when I go into a wine store and I don't know these people? What do I buy? And what do I ask?
And how's it going so far with the book?
Oh, it's been, not in my wildest dreams I would have allowed to dream for 50%. It's humbling.
Wow.
It's humbling. And thanks to Christine Mulke, who made this book sound English without any Aldoisms, and took all the Austrian English hiccups out. And then, of course, Elena Sullivan, who designed the book, made this so she really got what we wanted to do. And we had a phenomenal editor. So again, I had a phenomenal team there. And now it's out in German too.
Yeah, show that. It's just
April. I got it literally today. This is the German version.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't have children, but if this feels like these are children.
An exact translation?
We tried, but it's sheer impossible.
But the content is more or less
the content is same, but as German language is much more words are longer, sentences are by default getting longer. It was, it's very difficult, to write something who am I telling this? Something dense and short.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because when I worked for Bob Parker, I remember seeing his books translated in French, and they looked nothing like the versions in the States. They cut out almost everything, and it was just basically the French parts.
It's a little thicker, the German version, a little bit, but it was really, we worked very hard to keep this really, really tight and in the same format. But and also certain words to translate, like we say tart. I don't know a German word for that. So I asked a ton of friends, especially comes into game when you talk about, Brut Nature champagne. We use a term which is actually used more for tannic on red wines, but the legal wording still uses this for sparkling wine. So, I mean, my brain was almost jumping out of my skull.
Wow. I've only written parts of books, so I've never written a complete book on my own. This is a fantastic achievement. And
Thank you so much.
um,
The reviews were also great. This was the other thing which you don't know what social media says. It's very hard to control that. But also the media, and we got from, I spoke to the German marketer today and I said, your reviews are just off the charts. And I said, yeah, I couldn't have dreamed for more. It's crazy. So
that's cool.
that's why I'm working it now hard still.
Well, let's see. Positive attitude is absolutely critical right now, especially always, but especially now. And on top of all of that, you also find time to make wine. So how did that project come about?
I'm at this, how should I say this? I came to a point, I went to Argentina in 2008 and traveled there, and we were sitting at Achaval Ferrer with a bunch of winemakers, and they asked me to criticize their wines. I said, excuse me, who am I to criticize your wines? And kind of this stuck with me a little bit, and I thought over it, and I thought, actually criticize only, but I make nothing. But I like to be hands-on. I like to get my hands dirty. I wash them now, also full disclosure. But
Know what you mean, figuratively. Well, literally too, but making wine, yeah.
So I thought this would be actually great because I would just learn more and more in not even theoretically, but really practically. And I spoke to one winemaker and I asked also down there how much is 1 hectare, but it always took 3 seconds for them. And then I realized they converted the prices. What they didn't tell me was that you have to pay the water rights extra, and that's typically under the table. And if you don't have water in Argentina, you don't make anything. So I spoke to an Austrian winemaker and I said, but for these prices, you can do something comfortably in Austria and you don't have to worry about the political nightmare. And then the second person was Gerhard Kracher, who came just accidentally to town. And I told him that, and Gerhard said, why don't we do something together? So we discussed immediately what we did not want to make and where we didn't want to go. And we were immediately aligned with that. So, and then we said we wanted to make Grüne Veltliner. We wanted to go to the Weinviertel, which is the largest but underdeveloped area, and we wanted to work strong with limestone soil. And at first it started with one wine. The first vintage was 09. Now we are on 4 different labels. And now it became work. But I enjoy it. It's painful because nature doesn't cooperate with you. What worked last year doesn't work this year. This vintage is very different than the previous vintage. Every vintage has a different challenge. So you get to see the pain of the farmers. And since we farm only one variety, what to harvest first. And I compare this always like visiting a large family, I'm obviously very thankful that I'm so exposed in my job. And winemakers always welcome me so open-heartedly. But it's like you probably, it's like you visit a large family. They line up the well-behaved children up in the front and the naughty ones are locked away. And you never get to see them. So the advantage right now is I get to see that. And I can also, test certain things, and we test all the time. And you learn a ton, and you lose being dogmatic about certain things. Of course, you have an opinion, but you lose being dogmatic.
And so the 4 wines that you make now, what does the lineup look like today?
The entry level is our Grüne Veltliner Lion, which is actually our last wine in the program. I never wanted to make that wine because our Israeli and Russian importer came and bugged Gerhard all the time to make a more accessible style of wine. And I work at Le Bernardin. Accessible necessarily, I want to make complications, right?
Yeah.
I looked always up for Burgundy. Not that we wanted to make a Gruner Veltliner who tastes like Burgundy, but I looked for Gruner Veltliners which have concentration and freshness at the same time, which is often a challenge. Something simplified was not in my repertoire. And Gerhard and I have this deal: if we're both not the same opinion, it's the other one's job to bring a good enough argument. And at one point, he got me in a weak moment. I said, "Yeah, make it and make a barrel or two, and that's it." And then he gave it, he gave it to Michael Engelmann, and Michael said, "Oh wow, this is super delicious," right? And now it's crazy successful. That wine, it kills me to admit it, but it's the truth. So that's the first one. The Alter Reben is like the old wine, Gruner Veltliner. It's a little bit more a level up. It's more concentrated. Currently, it's a 2016 vintage in the market because we like to leave the wines much longer the least. They benefit from that. Then we have a Gruner Veltliner, which is made in the Burgenland, on the Leiterberg, which is grown on calcareous fossil soil. So that's the first vintage was 2013, actually 2012, but 2012 was such a dry vintage. The weekend before we wanted to harvest, the wild boar came out of the forests and took out the whole fruit.
Wow.
Yeah, welcome in farming. That's what you learn. So we have to work there very, very differently. And then single vineyard was the original wine. That's from a 50-year-old vineyard. And it's rich, it's complex, and also there. So it's fun. I learned so much, and I have a couple of great winemakers who mentor me in Burgundy, especially, and I'm super thankful about that.
Yeah, that must be fascinating. I've never made a wine, but I bet that is pretty interesting.
Oh, it's humbling. I mean, I give you a perfect example, and it's not a big secret. I'm very friendly with Jean-Marc Rouleau, and maybe it's too technical, but you can break me down. In 2009 was the first vintage, and when we released it, I made a terroir with Paul Greco. I made the release party, and as you can imagine, you get the first case of wine. I invited a bunch of friends, and I opened the first bottle, and it was completely cloudy. And I looked up, I had a protein haze, and I thought, damn, well, maybe it's only one bottle. So I opened the other ones, exactly the same. So I called Gerhard and said, Gerhard, the wine is completely cloudy. He said, absolutely impossible. Mine are completely clear. Then, of course, he put it in the car and drove a day around with it in the summer heat. It became very obvious. Yes, it had it. And the only reason why we didn't find was also, or it didn't came up to me, because I listened to Olivier St-Humbrecht, which I love to listen to because he's so intense in the knowledge. He said, finding is not necessary because you only strip out the negative protein, you strip out the positive protein. If you extend barrel aging, it would fall out on its own. And that made sense to me, but we extended over a year. So I thought we are easy in. Sure enough, not at all. And then a couple months after, Jean-Marc Rouleau took me to the lab for a finding session. And I called Gerhard immediately after and said, we got to find. And Gerhard said, over my dead body, I've never found in my life. And he went on a rant and then said, tell me when you finished. And then I said, okay, go over there now, try it. I called in 3 hours. And then he still can tell me over dead body, but I know already now it works. And ever since we find. I went also to Olivier back, to Olivier St-Humbrecht back, and I said, do you still stick to this theory? He says, absolutely. And I said, I have proved it's wrong. Now look, of course, it works on his varieties, it works. Gruner Veltliner, we've learned, growing on limestone has a very high protein level. So you almost need to find, unless you ferment super warm.
So apparently you had a disagreement, but you convinced him.
Yeah, but again, Aldo sommelier. He's a super experienced winemaker. Can you imagine?
Sometimes having a fresh view is, I mean, I think in any field, if you're so close to it, you don't see the forest through the trees, as we say in English. You get so focused on something and you don't understand the broader context.
Exactly. That's why I enjoy it so much, because not even Gerhard has experience with Gruner Veltliner, and that's completely outside of his. So we don't have this family, history with it. We can do pretty much anything. And now, in retrospect, experience is not necessarily a bad thing when you know the outcome, but it's very exciting to learn.
I bet it is, especially
So,
from someone like that. I mean, that's about as good as it gets as a partner. Let's take some questions because there's some really cool questions here. So Robert writes that in your book, there's no mention of sweet wines. And do you worry about?
No, I talk about Gerhard Kracher's project. I talk about sweet wine, yes. I mean, I love sweet wine, don't get me wrong. It's just, it's a little bit sad. And I think I talk also about Egon Müller's wines. I'm pretty sure about that. Sweet wine seems to be in a slight recession. You see this especially in the port market. Look how many dry whites and reds you get right now from the Douro Valley all of a sudden. Look how many Bordeaux Blancs all of a sudden surface. Me personally, when I've talked this on last year's Riesling Fire, people have a weird relationship with residual sugar. And again, I take my partner, Catherine. She doesn't like Riesling because she thinks it's sweet. However, when I give her Riesling, she absolutely loves it. She said, this is really delicious. It just has to be in balance. And when you taste, for instance, all the Egon Müllers, you know, when you get to his ice wines or TBAs, I mean, if price is not necessarily in your way, I mean, those are just monumental wines.
Yeah.
So.
But this is true, I think, all over the world. I mean, this is same thing in Bordeaux you mentioned, but a lot of Sauternes. So Sauternes is it's an appellation that, as you know, can only be used for sweet wines. But what you're seeing now is a lot of dry whites being made from Sauternes, the place called Sauternes, but those wines cannot be called a dry white from Sauternes. So they end up being, you know, a Bordeaux.
So, but also to answer maybe the question from Robert completely, the thing was also, look, a beginner doesn't necessarily start with sweet wine because it puts him off.
Yeah.
And making sweet wine is actually super, super complicated.
It's super complicated, but I also think the way that we eat and dine has just changed so dramatically.
Yeah.
So these wines, sweet wines, used to actually be served with first courses in meals. You know, we're talking now several generations ago. And now they're mostly relegated to at the end of the meal. But even so, I mean, look, as an example, I mean, I love Sauternes, but I can't remember the last time I bought a bottle. If somebody serves it to me, I love it. I appreciate it. When I go taste these wines for a review, I might go nuts over the ones I really like, Doisy Dane and etc. or Icam or whatever. But you have to think about, when is the last time you bought one of these wines? When was the last time you opened one of these wines? And all of us, like our global consumption for these wines, the occasions to open them has just gone way down. And that's why these wines from whatever country, whatever region, they're all struggling because we just don't open them. You know, we don't think of them anymore. And if you do have if you do love Sauternes, you know, how much are you going to drink? You're going to drink a glass, a taste. You're not going to drink, you know, like volume of it. So it's
also, people say always foie gras and Sauternes. But do this in a tasting menu. You start with a Sauternes right from the get-go. I mean, where do you continue with your wine pairing?
Yeah.
It's just very hard to digest.
Yeah, no, I know. And then there's another question from Adam about Valtellina. What are your thoughts on Valtellina?
I mean, I love RPP. It's a very unique area. There's no question about it. I like those. They're hardy wines. I'm from an alpine country, so I do like them. But I see Americans taking a little longer to get onto that because I think they still go strong to Piedmont. Now maybe a little bit northern Piedmont, they gravitate into Gemmi Gattinara because of the price-wise more attractive. And I think it probably takes a little time to get further north.
Yeah, I mean, I love those wines.
But your expertise is better than mine here.
Well, I mean, I think maybe, but I mean, I think, you know, you mentioned the leading estate, and the thing is, if you said, okay, like after that, you know, there's a few, but then after that, it's kind of a vacuum. I do think that, you know, the Sforzato, which is the famous wine from there, was made from dried grapes, kind of Amarone style, back in an era when you couldn't get grapes ripe enough. And now this is a region, like all northerly regions, where the whole idea of viticulture is changing a lot because of climate change. And
it's too alcoholic. People don't like that anymore.
Yeah.
That's the other
So
problem.
yeah. So I think it's kind of an uncertain future, but as an optimist, I think there's a tremendous opportunity because there is a focus in the world of indigenous grape wines and wines that have really strong character that can't be replicated. So whether, that's whatever that might be, wines that speak of a place. And certainly I'm going to ask you what you're drinking in a second, but as I think we all want these wines that speak of a place. So those are wines that are very unique. They're very particular. And Arepepe is the leading producer of Valtellina. I think the wines are brilliant. I've served them next to the most coveted rare Burgundies and Barolos and Barbarescos, and they always show well. And so I think Valtellina is a wonderful region. There's other producers too, Sandro Fe, Mamete Prevostini, there's others. And I think that it's a region that still has a lot of untapped potential because the global appetite for Nebbiolo is just exploding and all of the top producers have limited production. So if you can make a really beautiful wine, handcrafted in that region, I think it has a great potential. But what are you tasting?
A little leftover. You see, the funny thing is, when I woke up this morning, I opened my Instagram and then I saw Eric posting a feed about what he does with lentils and salmon. And ironically, yesterday, this probably we worked so much together, we almost think alike in the same sense. I made yesterday also, Catherine made the lentils and I made a steelhead trout. I grilled it, so it looked almost identical. And we had Saint-Aubin, Chatinier by Piaf, 13, and I had a little leftover. So I always like to review wines the next day, how they perform and how it lasts.
Yeah, I mean, Saint-Aubin, which borders Chassagne and Montrachet in Côte de Beaune, is one of those appellations where you can still find wines that don't cost an arm and a leg. Although Pierre's wines have obviously escalated a lot in price as he's become more known. But one of the questions, obviously, I'm sure you get asked a lot, that I get asked a lot, is where is there value in Burgundy? And Saint-Aubin is definitely one of those villages where you get the richer, creamier, buttery style, as opposed to wines that are more like orchard fruit or floral. But Saint-Aubin is obviously a great place for value priced wines. I have
and I like his Chatinier. That's why I like his. Actually, it's one of my favorite vineyards from him.
Yeah, you might get me to make lentils tonight then. I have this. This is wine I love. Certas Trout Gulch Pinot Noir from Santa Cruz Mountains. It's my favorite wine that they make, and that because I just love the Santa Cruz Mountains, but his style and in that vintage they really nailed it with some changes to farming. And I have a little bit left over from my tasting the other day. So
they make us a delicious Chardonnay from that vineyard.
Yeah, so that's kind of what's on my mind. Let's see. This is a comment that I've gotten up from that I've heard from a lot of people, which is, so you're a wine director, so obviously there's people who report to you who are part of your team. And I've heard from a lot of wine directors that they're really struggling on how to keep people focused and engaged in a time of great uncertainty. So I'm curious what you're doing this is a question from Bertrand. I'm curious what you're doing to keep your people motivated, focused. Can you even when they don't even have a job? What are you doing? What are you suggesting to them? And what can people who are in the trade who want to help, what can they do to keep people engaged?
Very challenging question. It's a great question, but I don't know what happens tomorrow. That's the main issue. I really don't. I talked to a fair amount to the majority of the team. I just don't know what I can promise them because I have no idea. I don't even know it about myself. But for instance, look, I am nobody without my team, no matter what. This is one thing I put immediately on when I started at Le Bernardin. I changed also the hiring style from Le Bernardin because it's very difficult to get a sommelier from outside and make him successful at Le Bernardin and stay with you. I don't like to have rotations that you keep changing sommeliers every half year, a year. That's no good. So typically they start at the wine bar, and I have no problem hiring them very, very green. They always make fun of me because I always keep saying this. You know, when I look, I try to feel out also the sommelier when they interview, and often, of course, I ask them wine questions. You know, name the Grand Cru in Meursault. Trick questions like that.
You're mean.
No, but to me, I just the only thing, and I've been point blank, I want to see. They feel, of course, that the pressure of these questions. The only thing what I'll actually look for is how excited and how passionate is this person. The rest you can teach, because you just put them into a system and they start studying, and then the cream rises to the top, and then when you see they have the right mindset, you promote them over to Le Bernardin. Mm-hmm. So I try to make them study. I mean, I spoke recently to my right and often my left hand, Katja, which you know.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, treat this time as a gift, because you will never have as much time to study than now. I mean, again, you can sit back and say, complain about right now. Well, what's the point? There's nothing you can change. Study, push. This is a gift right now. And so you do that. You check in with them and mentor them, because again, I cannot promise them what I might not be able to offer.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that's kind of, for me, the uncertainty. I have no problem with bad news. It's fine. The uncertainty I don't like.
I don't think anybody likes uncertainty. That's the most unsettling thing of all. And the truth is that nobody really knows what's going to happen tomorrow, much less in a month or 3 months or in 6 months.
So, but with some of them, actually, I meet over on FaceTime calls or on house party, and we have a glass of wine together, and then we laugh about the good old days, and yeah.
No, that's true. That's all we can do. Here's a question that's interesting, because Eric Ripert, the chef and one of the owners of Le Bernardin, is known for loving Bordeaux. So what do you do?
I have good news.
Huh?
I have good news.
Oh, you've changed.
Yes, there's actually a story, and this is when I started at Le Bernardin. Eric always is a quality checker. You need to know that. He goes from one place to the next one and checks everything, and he corrects immediately and tells you also why not to make it that way. Right? So I think one of my first months at Le Bernardin, he hosted his wife's birthday party. And then he asked me to do a pairing. And I remember there was, he had this Hawaiian white tuna de Escolar with a red wine Bernays. And I paired an Meursault du Chauffour from Hubert-Ligné, an 01, with it. And about 15 minutes before the event started, Ben, the maître d', came, like yelling and screaming with my sommelier back in the Romain, who was my right hand back then. I said, "You know that Aldo doesn't know. Chef only likes Bordeaux. We have to change that wine." I said, "I'm not changing the wine. Chef asked me for a pairing, right? This is the pairing. There's no Bordeaux which works with this thing. So he asked me for a pairing. So we're not going to change the wine. And look, if he wants Bordeaux, by all means, we open Bordeaux. If this is the biggest problem, we have no problem." So Eric came after that dinner, tapped on my shoulder, said, "You know what? I have to give it to you. It was a really good pairing. But in future, I love Bordeaux." I said, "Chef, then thank you very much. It's very kind of you. But can you make me then a steak? Can you cook a steak and not fish? Because then we have easy access with Bordeaux. It's no problem."
So let's take a more obvious extreme. What if somebody orders like a big?
But he likes Burgundy now. He's getting into Burgundy. It took me 13 years. Even Jay McInerney, our common friend, is just astonished. But a couple of years ago, Jay invited us, and one of his good friends brought a 62 Clos de Besse from Brousseau, and Eric tasted it. "Wow, this is the first Pinot I really like." They said, "Yeah, and you might want to keep this for yourself."
Yeah. Well, I think in wine world, a lot of times all roads lead to Burgundy, and also some amount of financial ruin, but if you like wines like that. But what about an extreme? What about an extreme example? What if somebody wants like a big Napa Cabernet? Then what?
Look, I have not the luxury of judging people. I don't. And I might tell them if they ask me, what would I suggest? And if they like, a screaming eagle with their poached halibut, I became honest to them and said, listen, I'm obviously very, very happy to give you this wine with no question. This might be not your perfect pairing with it. And if people tell you, oh, I understand, but I really love this wine, I've done my job. And I'm not here to judge. This is one of the first lessons I've learned as a young sommelier, and I had a very strong mentor who recommended a client, and I remember the moment as it was yesterday, a 76 Lafite, oddly enough, with fried calamari. And as a young sommelier, I was stretching in the corner and said, this does not make any sense. And he says to me, look at this person's face, facial expression. Words always can lie. Facial expressions typically don't. Do you see this person enjoying this combination? Do you see him having a great time with his meal? And I said, yeah. I said, are you willing to go there and tell him this is a terrible pairing? He was in the mood for that. And I took this as a lesson. We have different palates, and that's okay. And we have also different mindsets.
We have different mindsets, and I think ultimately you have to drink the wines you like with the food you like, and that's
absolutely.
That's
And often it's also a knowledge level. I mean, this is often what it is. Look, we didn't start right away with all these crazy wines. It's a process, and that's fair. Listen, it's a growing part. I mean, I started also drinking Yellowtail. That's just what it was about. Unimaginable today, and there's no judgment to that. It's fine.
Not at all. I think we've got time for one last question, which is one that I have personal interest in. So, with sushi, besides champagne, which is obviously a great pairing, what else do you like to do?
Really do champagne with sushi all the time?
Well, I like champagne, but I also like Chablis very much.
Yeah. Obviously, despite some bias, I like Grüne Veltliner, and if you don't get this through, I drink also dry Rieslings with it.
Yeah, I mean, those are Blanc de Blanc champagne, and but not zero dosage, because I think it's too harsh.
That's too hard. That's why I raised the question. I know your palate, which champagnes you like.
But I'm not a huge fan of the zero dosage, honestly. I mean, some of them I like, but often I think they're a little too bracing, and I don't think that they necessarily pair well with food. But yeah, of course, Gruner, Riesling, Blanc de Blanc with a little bit of dosage. I mean, not everybody likes Grand Marque, but something like Taittinger Comte would be, I think, ideal.
Yeah.
But it could be Villemard, or it could be Pierre, which has some Pinot. It could be Pierre Peters, something like that would be delicious. So we're right up against our time frame. I'm sorry that we couldn't, and there's a ton of questions. I'm just apologize to everybody that we can't get to them all. But Aldo, it's just been such a privilege to have you on our show.
Oh, thank you for having me. Are you kidding?
It's really fun. And obviously, I mean, I learned a lot. I think everybody else learned a lot. And so thanks for your time. Thanks for helping us stay connected in this very challenging moment. And I hope we don't have you on again, because I hope that we're all working. And I want to see you at Le Bernardin or the wine bar, and really not on a webinar, because you're going to be too busy. That's what I'm hoping.
It's odd, because for the first time in my life, but this is the odd thing, I have time. Yeah. It's just the weirdest feeling for me to admit.
I'll be very happy when you say, thanks, but I don't have time.
Yeah.
So with that, good night, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll post this on our YouTube channel and on Instagram.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, Aldo, and talk to everyone soon. Thanks.